I didn't find them. I think they found me. In the middle of a snowstorm, with death hiding beneath every frozen breath, I, an old canine dog, lay down beside a mother and her child, barely alive. I wasn't in service anymore. But when I looked into her eyes, I knew my mission wasn't over. Not yet. This time, it wasn't for duty. It was for love. I used to think retirement meant peace, meant silence, meant mornings by the fireplace and evenings watching the wind stir the pines outside the window. For a while I tried to believe that. But that winter, when the snow fell thicker than usual, and the nights stretched longer than they should have, I felt it deep in my bones. Something wasn't done. Something was calling. Jack tried to leave me home that night. He always did. Said my hips were getting stiff. Said I deserved rest. He wasn't wrong. My muzzle's gone mostly white now, and some mornings I limp a bit before the joints warm up. But he forgot one thing. I don't serve because I was trained to. I serve because it's who I am. So I followed him to the cruiser like I always used to. Didn't bark, didn't whine, just stared. He sighed, ran a hand over my head, and opened the back door. "Fine," he said, "but you stay warm. No heroics." I wish I could say I listened. Willow Creek was quiet, blanketed in snow, the kind of snow that doesn't fall. It presses, covers everything like a secret too heavy to keep. Jack drove slow. The roads were iced over and empty. Most folks were hunkered down, their windows glowing faintly behind curtains drawn tight. It was New Year's Eve, but you wouldn't have known it. No fireworks, no laughter, just the creak of branches under weight and the sound of the heater ticking in the car. I sat behind Jack, watching him. He looked older than he used to. He always had those tired eyes, but there was something deeper now. Since Emily passed, he hadn't been the same. He stayed out later, smiled less. Talked even less than that. But I stayed with him. That's what partners do. We rolled down Maple Avenue, then turned past the old hardware store, the one with the busted neon sign that still blinked open, even though it hadn't been in years. Jack was about to make his usual loop back to Maine when something pricked in the air. It wasn't a smell, not yet, but a change, sharp, faint, like the way a rabbit's fear tastes in the breeze. I sat up. My ears caught it before anything else. A voice, soft, barely there. A child's voice, trembling. "Mommy, is it okay if we sleep here tonight?" I barked once, short and hard. Jack slammed the brakes, cursed under his breath. "What is it, Bear?" I jumped into the front seat, nose pressed to the side window, then pawed the door. I had to get out, now. Jack knew that bark. He opened the door before I could tear the seat fabric. I hit the snow running, paws sinking, lungs pulling in air so cold it hurt. The scent came fast. Flesh, ice, fear, and something else. Stillness. There's a kind of stillness that only comes when something living is about to stop being alive. I found them in the park, near the back where the benches face the river. The snow had buried most of the shapes, but I saw the outline. A bundle of blankets, maybe. Leftovers from a homeless camp. But no. I got closer, sniffing deep. That was no blanket. She was curled up on the bench, arms wrapped around something small. A child. A boy. 2 years old, maybe. His face was flushed from the wind, but his hands were blue, his tiny fingers clenched around a stuffed animal that had lost one eye and half its stuffing. Jack ran up behind me. "Oh, God!" He radioed for backup, but I wasn't waiting. I climbed up beside the bench, nudging the woman's shoulder gently. No response. Her face was too pale, lips tinged purple, hair matted with ice. The boy whimpered once. That was enough. I did what instinct told me. I lay down against him, pressed my body close to his, curled around the side not covered by his mother's arms. He was so cold, so light, like holding smoke. I tucked my muzzle beneath his chin and felt him twitch. Jack wrapped his coat around both of them, his hands shaking. "Come on, come on." Sirens began to rise in the distance. I stayed still, heart pounding. I could feel the boy's breathing, shallow, uneven. But it was there. He was fighting. The woman stirred for a second. Her eyes opened, barely. Brown, clouded. She saw Jack, and fear twisted across her face. Then she saw me, and for a flicker of a heartbeat, the fear eased. She reached one trembling hand toward my ear and passed out. They took us all to the hospital. I wasn't supposed to go inside, but Jack didn't care. "He stays," he told the nurse. "They're alive because of him." We waited outside the triage room, the heat inside thawing the ice on my fur, leaving puddles at my feet. I didn't move. I watched every door, every nurse, every beep. I had seen death before, smelled it. That boy. He wasn't out of the woods yet. Jack sat beside me, didn't speak, didn't move either. We just waited, partners. Eventually, a doctor came out. She was tall, gray hair tied back, no nonsense. "They'll live," she said, but it was close. She looked at me for the first time, her voice softening. "That dog saved that child's life. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jack didn't. He reached over, scratched behind my ear, and whispered, "Good boy." But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because something about the woman, her face, that tattoo on her wrist, it tugged at something in Jack's memory, and in mine too. I didn't know what we'd stumbled into yet, but I could feel it, deep in my chest. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning, and whatever came next, I'd be there, just like always, because I wasn't just a retired canine dog. I was Bear, and I had one last mission. I don't remember the drive back from the hospital that night. Maybe that's because I wasn't really in the truck. My body was there, curled on the back seat, still damp from melted snow. But my thoughts were somewhere else, wrapped around that boy's faint heartbeat, around the slow rise and fall of his mother's chest, around the heaviness I felt in Jack's silence. There are things even a seasoned canine like me can't explain. I've chased down fugitives, sniffed out explosives, tracked missing hikers through 6 miles of forest in a thunderstorm. But that night was different. It wasn't duty that led me into that park. It was something older, quieter, like a memory I didn't know I had. Jack didn't say much when we got home. Just dried me off with an old towel and sat on the floor next to me for a while. He had that faraway look in his eyes again, the one that used to come when Emily's favorite song played on the radio, or when he opened the fridge and saw the half-empty jar of strawberry jam she used to love. I rested my head on his thigh, and he finally spoke. "She's got a tattoo, Bear," he said. "An hourglass wrapped in thorns." I didn't know what that meant, but I felt his heartbeat quicken. "I've seen it before," he whispered. The next morning came slow, heavy with the kind of cold that seeps into the wood. Jack made a pot of strong coffee, fed me half a biscuit, and we sat in silence until the sun rose enough to smear a weak yellow over the snow outside. The world felt like it was holding its breath. Later that day, Jack went back to the hospital. He left me home, said I needed rest. Maybe I did. My legs still ached from laying so long in the snow, but my ears never stopped listening. I sat by the window, watching each car that passed. Ears perked every time an engine slowed. I was waiting. not sure for what, but waiting all the same. When Jack came back, his boots were damp, and his eyes darker than when he left. He didn't take off his coat, just sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the floor. "She's Ellie Moore," he finally said. "Went missing 3 years ago. Nursing student. Good kid. Filed a restraining order against her ex and disappeared a week later." I nudged his leg. He kept talking. "They never found anything. No body. No evidence. Just vanished." I let out a low whine. I didn't know Ellie, but I knew what pain smelled like, and hers had seeped into her clothes, into the boy's skin, into the very snow around them. "They've got her stabilized," Jack added. "The boy, too. His name's Cody." I closed my eyes. Cody. That name felt right. Soft, small, like the warmth I'd felt when he stirred against my fur. Jack leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "She flinched when she saw my badge," he said. "But when you walked in the room, she cried." I remembered that. The way she reached for my ear like it was the only thing real in a world that had turned to ice. Jack looked at me and shook his head. "You've always had better instincts than I do." The next day, Jack got special permission to bring Ellie and Cody to a safe place. Not a shelter, not a station, but our cabin, up in the hills, quiet, off the grid. Emily used to love it there, said it felt like the world stopped spinning for a while. We hadn't been back since the funeral. But when Jack asked me if we should go, I stood up, tail high, and walked to the door. Some things you don't need words for. The cabin sat nestled between 2 old pines, snow piling on the roof like frosting on a forgotten cake. Jack started a fire while I padded around, sniffing corners, checking for raccoons. Everything smelled like dust, ash, and something bittersweet, like the memory of laughter in an empty room. Ellie sat on the couch, Cody curled in her arms, still bundled in that oversized hospital hoodie. He stared at me as I walked past, wide-eyed, unsure. I kept my distance at first, gave them space. Trauma has a scent too, and it hung on him like smoke. But Ellie watched me differently, like she remembered. After a while, I laid down near the hearth. Close enough to watch, not close enough to threaten. That's when she spoke. "I used to have a dog," she said softly. Jack was stirring soup on the stove. He glanced back, but said nothing. "His name was Scout," she added. "Golden retriever. Dumb as a brick, but sweet as sugar." Cody reached out, tiny fingers brushing the top of my paw. I stayed still. He pressed his forehead against my leg, then let out a long sigh. And in that moment, the cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was a beginning. That night, after Cody finally drifted off, and Ellie sat by the fire sipping tea from one of Emily's old mugs, Jack brought out the photo album. The one he never opened anymore. The one with the frayed leather cover and the little maple leaf stitched into the corner. He placed it on the coffee table, but didn't open it. "I used to come here with my wife," he said. Ellie didn't speak, just watched the flames flicker. "She passed," Jack added, voice low. 2 winters ago." Ellie set the mug down and folded her hands. "I'm sorry." Jack nodded. Silence hung between them for a long time. Cody stirred in his sleep, mumbling something no one could make out. Then Ellie said, "This place feels safe." Jack looked at her. "That's the point," he said. I don't know what made me move, but I got up and walked over to Ellie. Sat beside her. She didn't flinch. She reached out and placed a hand on my back, fingers trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. And though I couldn't speak, I think she knew what I meant when I pressed my head gently against her knee. "You're welcome." That night, I dreamed of snow that didn't hurt, of children's laughter, of Emily's soft voice humming somewhere in the distance. And when I woke, the fire was still burning, Cody was still breathing, and Ellie was still here. I was tired, but I wasn't done. Not yet. There's a rhythm to a house when it holds someone broken. The quiet's never quite quiet, always carrying the hush of fear, the creak of memories too loud to speak. I knew that rhythm well. I'd heard it in the homes we were called to after the yelling stopped and the bruises began to fade. I heard it now in the way Ellie stirred her tea 3 times before sipping. In the way Cody clung to that tattered bear, like it was the only part of his world that hadn't changed. 3 days passed in the cabin. Snow still fell, softer now, drifting like dust across the windowsills. Jack tried to act like this was normal, like bringing a woman and her child into the last place he'd shared with his wife wasn't turning his soul inside out. But I could see it, in the way his hand hesitated over Emily's old quilt, or how he paused a second too long outside the bedroom door. He stayed busy, fixed the generator, chopped firewood, made stew from cans he hadn't touched in months. Anything to keep from sitting too long, anything to keep from remembering. Me? I kept watch. Cody had taken to sitting beside me most mornings, humming songs without words. His fingers would twist into my fur, small and warm, and when he leaned against me, I'd press back just enough to let him know I was real. Still here. Ellie was slower to open up. Her voice stayed low, her eyes always checking the windows. The sound of tires on gravel made her freeze. Once, a raven landed on the roof and knocked some ice loose, and she dropped her mug hard enough to shatter it. Jack didn't pry. He just swept up the pieces and said, "It's just glass." But I could smell what she was hiding. Guilt, worn into her skin like old smoke, and shame, sour, bitter. The kind that doesn't come from doing something wrong, but from surviving something you weren't supposed to. On the 4th morning, I found her on the porch, wrapped in Jack's old flannel coat. Cody was still asleep. She didn't notice me at first, just stared out at the trees, steam rising from her coffee, like a ghost leaving her fingers. "His name was Trevor," she said, not looking at me. "My ex, Cody's father." I sat beside her. We met in college. He was charming, the kind that makes you feel lucky just to be looked at. I rested my chin on her knee. He changed after I got pregnant. Said I owed him, that I'd ruined his future. Then he started drinking. Her voice was too calm. That scared me more than if she'd shouted. I tried to leave. Thought I could file for custody, get help. But he had friends. People who owed him favors, the kind who wear badges. I learned real quick that not all shelters are safe. She looked down at me. That's why I didn't trust Jack at first. The uniform. It used to mean danger. I didn't move, just blinked slow. She needed this, and I knew how to listen. I ran, took Cody, changed our names, thought I could disappear. She wiped her face with the sleeve of the coat. We stayed in churches, under bridges. One winter, we made it as far as Arizona before someone recognized me. That's when I found this place. Willow Creek, a town forgotten by time and mercy. That night in the park, her voice cracked. I didn't think we'd make it. I nudged her hand. She let her fingers tangle in my fur. But you came. I don't even know why. I wanted to tell her I didn't either, only that something pulled me, like a thread tied to my chest. Inside, Jack was flipping through an old folder. I knew that look. The one he wore right before everything got dangerous. He called someone, a name I hadn't heard in years. Detective Alvarez. Retired, but still had friends in high places. Jack kept his voice low, but I caught pieces. Tattoo. Hourglass with thorns. Cold case. Ellie Moore. Denver PD. Ellie came in while he was still on the call. She stood behind him, eyes darting between the photos spread across the table. Her face went white when she saw one of them. "That's him," she said. Jack turned. "Trevor?" "No, that's Bryce, his cousin. He was worse, smarter, slippery. He's the one who found us again." Jack looked at me. "Bryce Langston," he muttered. "That name's been flagged before." I let out a low growl. That night, none of us slept well. I stayed by the door, ears twitching at every snap of branch outside. Jack cleaned his service weapon twice. Ellie locked and relocked the windows. Cody, though, he slept. Curled against the fire, one arm draped over me like we'd been doing this our whole lives. And maybe we had. Maybe some bonds don't need years to be forged. Just one night, one breath shared in the cold. The next morning, a car pulled up the road. Not a cruiser, not someone from town. Black sedan, tinted windows, Idaho plates. Jack saw it first. He was on the porch before the engine cut. I stood beside him, tail stiff. A man stepped out, late 40s, tan coat, leather gloves, clipboard. "Morning," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm from Child Protective Services. Got a call about a minor living in an unauthorized residence." Jack didn't blink. "You got ID?" "Of course," the man said, handing over a folder. I moved closer, sniffed the air. Lies smell like bleach and metal. Jack flipped through the papers, then paused. His face didn't change, but I felt his muscles tighten. "This signature's fake," he said flatly. The man chuckled. "Sir, I assure you, you listed the county CPS office at a P.O. box in Billings." Now the man's smile slipped. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Jack said, hand drifting near his sidearm. That's when I stepped forward. No bark, no growl, just a low, rumbling sound from deep in my chest. The man glanced at me, then back at Jack. "You're making a mistake." "Not the first," Jack replied. The man got back in the car, didn't slam the door, just drove off slow, like he wanted us to think he wasn't rattled. But I smelled it. He was. Inside, Ellie was frozen in place. She'd heard it all. Jack reached for her hand. "We've got time," he said, "but not much." I looked out at the trees. Snow still falling, but I knew a storm was coming. And this time, it wasn't just weather. I've spent most of my life learning to trust what I smell more than what I see. Men lie. Eyes lie. But scent remembers. Scent doesn't play games. When that man in the tan coat drove away, the air didn't carry the smell of government. It carried rust and gasoline and fear that wasn't his. It smelled like someone who's used to making people disappear. Jack knew it too. I could see it in how he stood just a little too still after the car vanished around the bend. He was already thinking ahead, running possibilities in that quiet, tactical way of his. No panic, just pressure. He turned and walked back into the cabin without saying a word, but his pace had changed. Quicker. He was a man who'd just decided something. Inside, Ellie was trying to keep it together. Her hand shook as she folded the same blanket 3 times in a row. Cody sat in the corner with his bear, watching her like he knew something wasn't right, but didn't know what to do about it. I walked over and sat between them, pressing my back against Cody so he had something solid to lean on. Jack laid the forged documents on the kitchen table. "We need to move fast," he said, mostly to himself. Ellie looked up. "What do you mean?" "That man wasn't CPS. I've worked with them. They don't show up alone. They don't hand over a file with a fake signature and a mailing address that traces to a storage locker." Her voice cracked. "So who was he?" "Best case, someone trying to intimidate you back into silence." "And the worst?" Jack didn't answer. He just picked up his phone. While he made the call, Ellie sat down beside me on the rug. Her fingers reached toward my fur but hovered there, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. I nudged her gently until her hand rested on my shoulder. She exhaled, long and low. "I should have known," she whispered. "I should have known the shelter wasn't safe." I turned my head slightly, watched her as she spoke. It looked legitimate. Clean walls, people smiling. They had pamphlets with bright colors and words like healing and restart and hope. God, I wanted to believe it. I could smell the ache in her voice. They said they could help with IDs, job placement, that they worked with state services, and for the first week it seemed real. There were other women, some with kids, some without. We all kept our heads down. She blinked hard, staring into the fire like it could burn away what she saw. Then the doors started locking at night, cameras in the halls. The staff stopped using names, just called us Mama, or Number 6, or Room 4. The food changed, so did the tone of the voices. No more kindness, just commands. She swallowed. I stayed still. They started separating the kids. Said it was to build independence, but I knew better. You don't build independence by locking a 2-year-old in a room with no windows. Cody had fallen asleep against my side. I felt his breath, warm and slow. I waited, watched. Tried to stay invisible. Then one night the heating failed. Coldest night of the year. The back fence, metal links, froze enough to snap if you hit it just right. She looked down at her hands. So I hit it, took Cody, and ran. Jack ended his call and came over, crouching near us. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. Ellie shook her head. "I left the others behind." "You stayed alive," Jack said. "That counts." He turned to me, then back to her, "And now it's our turn to help them." The next morning, Jack drove down into town to pull surveillance from the highway cams. I stayed at the cabin with Ellie and Cody. He told me before he left, "Watch them. No one comes in, not even the mailman." I understood. While he was gone, Ellie pulled out an old flip phone from her backpack. It was taped together, the screen cracked, but it still worked. She clicked through a few numbers, her hand shaking. "Are you calling someone?" I asked with my eyes. She looked at me. "I had a friend, back in Boulder, another girl from the shelter. We used to sneak notes under the cafeteria table." She hit send. It rang twice, then clicked. No voice. Just a hiss of static, and then, "You shouldn't be calling me." Ellie's eyes widened. "Carla? It's me. Ellie." Silence. Then a breath. "You're alive?" "I got out. I have my son. Are you safe?" "No," Carla whispered. "They moved us to another place. Different name, same people. They say it's a job training center now, but it's worse. They keep the women longer. Don't let us speak." Ellie's hand tightened around the phone. "Can you tell me where?" A pause. "Outside Laramie. Off Route 14. Old truck stop turned facility. There's a sign that says Sky Vista Resource Center, but it's not a center. It's a cage. Jack came back just after the call ended. Ellie told him everything. He nodded, pulled out a yellow notepad from his glove compartment, and wrote it all down. "I'm not waiting for red tape," he said. He opened the cabinet under the stairs and pulled out an old crowbar, a flashlight, and his sidearm, checked each in turn. "You're going tonight?" Ellie asked. Jack nodded. "I have to see it for myself." "I'm coming with you." "No." Her voice rose. "They took everything from me. They won't take anything else." She looked down, said nothing. "I need you to stay here. For Cody. For yourself." She nodded, slow and unwilling, but she understood. I stood beside Jack, ready. He looked at me. "You sure, old man?" I wagged once. We drove out just after sunset, south along a narrow road that twisted between frozen hills and stands of black pine. Jack kept the lights low. I kept my nose to the air. When we reached the place, it was just like Carla had said, an old truck stop with a new coat of paint. The sign glowed soft blue against the night. Sky Vista Resource Center. But I knew what it really was. A trap. I'll never forget what we saw that night. Shipping containers converted into living quarters. Women herded like animals. Kids kept in rooms with no windows. A playground built just for show. Swing sets that never moved. Jack snapped photos, recorded video, kept to the shadows. Then I pulled him toward the back. There was a trailer, locked, smelled different, foul, familiar. He broke it open with the crowbar. Inside, IDs, passports, social security cards, a desk piled with manila folders, and in the corner, photos, dozens of them, women, children. One of them was Ellie, backlit, scared, looking over her shoulder like she'd heard a noise. Jack's jaw clenched. "This is it," he whispered. "We stayed longer than we should have. Almost too long." As we were leaving, I caught a scent I'll never forget. That man, the fake CPS officer. He'd been here recently. The hair on my back stood up. Jack muttered, "We're out of time." We drove fast. Silent. But I knew something had shifted. The cold was no longer just weather, and the enemy was no longer hiding. He was watching, waiting. Sometimes, a man's fear doesn't show up on his face, doesn't tremble in his voice, but I can still smell it. Behind his cologne, beneath the starch of his shirt. It clings to the folds of his sleeves, rides in the sweat, just beneath his collar. It tells me what he won't say, what he's trying not to think. That morning, when Jack and I got back from the compound, he reeked of it. He didn't say a word as he parked the truck, just sat there for a moment with the engine still running, fingers tightening around the steering wheel. I could hear the slow creak of his leather gloves, the kind he only wore when he was hunting for something bigger than a bad guy. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Ellie sat on the floor, back against the couch, arms around Cody like she was afraid he might vanish if she blinked. She looked up when we entered, eyes scanning Jack's face first, then mine. Her lips parted, but she didn't ask. She didn't have to. Jack knelt beside her and placed the photo, the one from the trailer, on the rug. "That's where they kept you," he said softly. "They've moved others there. It's bigger than just one place. There's a network, a damn system." Ellie stared at the picture, her fingers brushing over the edges. I thought I was imagining it, she whispered. How organized it all felt. The forms, the schedules, the way they watched us. I told myself I was just being paranoid. You weren't, Jack said. She nodded slowly. Her voice dropped even lower. You found the records? Names, IDs, dozens. Some with photos, some just descriptions. It's enough to get the feds involved. But, Jack hesitated, his jaw clenched. The man who came here, he's been seen around that compound before. His name isn't Alton, it's Bryce Langston. Alias flagged in 3 states. No convictions, no warrant. Ellie stiffened. He's one of Trevor's cousins. He used to come by the apartment. Gave me cash when Trevor was high, said it was to keep the peace. But there were always strings. Jack leaned back on his heels. I think Bryce is trying to collect, or silence you. The room went quiet. Cody stirred in his sleep, mumbling something that sounded like, Mama. Ellie pulled him closer. I stood in the center of the room, watching them both, listening. The wind outside had picked up, whispering against the eaves, carrying with it the scent of snow that hadn't fallen yet. But something else rode that wind. Oil. Metal. A car engine left running. I walked to the window. There it was. Same black sedan. Parked further down the slope this time, half hidden between the trees. No one inside. Jack saw me stiffen. He joined me at the window and followed my gaze. Damn it, he muttered. He's watching. He grabbed his coat, threw on his holster, and turned to Ellie. Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'll handle this. I moved toward the door, tail rigid, ears high. Bear, no. You stay with them. I froze, looked back. He held my gaze for a long second. Please. I hesitated, then turned back. Ellie locked the door after him. She dropped the bar latch, then pulled the curtain tight. She didn't say anything, just stood there, breathing hard, one hand pressed flat against the wooden frame. I sat beside Cody, who had woken up, confused and quiet. He looked around the room, then crawled into my lap, burying his face against my chest. Ellie crouched beside us. I can't keep running, she whispered. I'm tired. I licked Cody's hair once, gently, then rested my head against her shoulder. Outside we heard nothing, just the howl of the wind, the occasional crack of ice shifting on the roof. An hour passed, then 2. Jack didn't come back. Ellie grew more restless with each passing minute. She paced the floor, chewed at her fingernails, jumped every time a branch scraped the glass. Finally she said, I can't wait anymore. She grabbed her jacket, stuffed a flashlight into her coat pocket, and strapped Cody to her chest with a fleece wrap. I don't care what he said, she told me. I'm not letting him face that man alone. I followed her out the back door. The snow had started again, soft at first, then harder. The sky hung low, gray and sullen. Ellie kept to the tree line, her breath short and fast. I trotted ahead, nose down. We reached the spot where the truck had been parked. Empty. Tire tracks led back down the hill, then veered off the road and into the woods. That's when I caught the scent again. Bryce and blood. I bolted, paws pounding against the snow, Ellie chasing behind me, stumbling with every step. It didn't take long. Jack's truck was there, its front end buried in a snowdrift. The driver's side door hung open, one boot print in the snow, then drag marks. A trail of blood led toward a thicket of pine. I howled, not from fear, from rage. Ellie caught up, gasping. She saw the blood, and her hand flew to her mouth. Oh, God! I darted into the trees, following the trail. My heartbeat thudded like a drum in my ears. Every instinct I'd honed in all my years came alive. My paws barely touched the ground. The trail ended at an old maintenance shed, long abandoned. The door was locked, but the hinges were rusted through. I threw myself against it. It splintered. Inside, Jack sat slumped against the wall, blood on his temple, a zip tie around his wrists. He was conscious, barely. When he saw me, he tried to smile. "Took you long enough?" Ellie rushed in behind me, tearing the tie free, checking his pulse, murmuring his name over and over. Jack winced. He ambushed me, said it was just a warning. Said next time he'd come for Cody. Ellie went still, then her voice turned cold. "No, he won't." She helped Jack to his feet. He leaned on her, groaning with each step. "I've got enough," he said through clenched teeth. "We take this to Alvarez. Now." We got back to the cabin just after midnight. Jack collapsed onto the couch. Ellie stitched the cut on his head with a kit from the first aid box, hands surprisingly steady. I laid beside him, pressing my weight gently against his leg. His fingers found my ear, scratched slow and soft. "Good boy," he whispered. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Ellie. We sat by the window, watching the shadows move outside, listening for sounds that didn't belong. And though the fire burned low, something else had ignited. Not just anger, resolve. They'd come for us once. They'd try again. But next time, we'd be ready. When I was younger, they trained me to track scent across rivers, through fire scars, even in places where no man had walked in years. But no amount of training prepared me for what we were chasing now. This wasn't just a person. This was a sickness, passed from one pair of hands to another, wrapped in paperwork and polite smiles, hiding in plain sight. After the attack on Jack, there was no more pretending this was a small-time threat. Bryce had shown his hand. He wasn't just watching us. He was sending a message, and we heard it loud and clear. But what he didn't understand is that when you go after a man like Jack O'Connor and threaten the people he's sworn to protect, even if he never swore it out loud, he doesn't run. He digs in. And I do too. Jack didn't rest long. A day and a half tops. Long enough for the swelling on his head to come down. For Ellie to check his vitals twice an hour, like she was back in nursing school. Long enough for Cody to lay beside him on the couch with a juice box and watch cartoons like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. That second night, Jack sat at the kitchen table with Alvarez on the line, speaking in clipped phrases. I laid under the table, listening to the sound of tension in his voice. Not raised, but wound tight. "They're moving them again," he said. "I've got a source. Another woman from the first facility, Carla. She got a burner out and reached Ellie. Told her about a site up near Twin Elk Ridge. Used to be a ranger station." He paused, nodded to himself, then jotted something down. "Yeah, I'm going." "No, not alone. I'll take the dog." He glanced under the table at me. I thumped my tail once. That was how we ended up heading back into the pines. This time, not just to investigate. This time, to document, to expose, to prepare for what came next. We left before dawn, truck packed with gear, cameras, extra batteries, 2 backup radios, and a crowbar Jack had named the Persuader. He didn't bring a rifle. Said it sent the wrong message. But he wore his badge. Said that still meant something. I sat in the passenger seat this time. He said I'd earned it. The road up to Twin Elk was barely a road anymore. Just 2 faded tire tracks through a wall of white, pine boughs, heavy with snow, hanging so low they brushed the roof of the truck. Jack drove slow, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee. Quiet. I knew he was remembering Emily. This was the same route they used to drive to go hiking, back when life was simpler, back when grief wasn't his shadow. "We used to bring lunch up here," he murmured, mostly to himself. "She always packed too many sandwiches." I leaned into his arm. He smiled, just a little. The old ranger station came into view around a bend. At first, just a chimney poking through the trees. Then the rotted wooden sign that said, "Camp Valley Shelter." Half the letters missing. The main building looked like it could fall in on itself any day. But behind it, the real compound began. Shipping containers. 5 of them, painted forest green. 2 rusted trailers. A chain-link fence, barely holding, with a padlock the size of my head. And silence. Too much of it. Jack parked far enough back that we'd have cover. We moved in on foot. I stayed low, every sense on alert. The snow muffled sound, but not smell. And what I smelled made my stomach turn. Urine. Old blood. Antiseptic. Cheap perfume. Humans lived here. Had been kept here. Were still here. We circled wide, coming in behind a stack of crates. Jack snapped photos with a handheld camera, then switched to video, narrating softly. August 23rd, 0700 hours. Compound behind Camp Valley, matching description from witness statements. No exterior signage, perimeter incomplete. He crouched beside a container and pointed to the lock. Fresh scratch marks. This door's been used recently. He looked at me. "You ready?" I was born ready. He jimmied the lock open with the crowbar and eased the door wide. Inside, the container had been gutted and refitted with bunks, 3 to a side, each with a number stenciled on the wall. No windows, no lights, just a bare bulb in the ceiling, strung from an exposed wire. There were toys on the floor, a juice box, still full, a child's sock. No voices. Jack's face hardened. "They've cleared out." I sniffed the air. Something lingered. Recent movement. A trail of sweat and adrenaline leading toward the tree line. I barked once. Short, urgent. We followed it. Back behind the compound was a slope, barely visible beneath the snow. Fresh tracks. Boot prints. Smaller steps. Maybe 3 or 4 people. Moving fast. Jack followed, careful not to disturb the pattern. At the bottom of the hill, we found the trailhead to a service road, and a pickup truck, engine still warm. He took more photos, logged the license plate. Then came the sound. A rustle. A cough. We froze. I stepped forward, ears high. Inside the bed of the truck, under a torn tarp, someone was hiding. Jack eased it back. A woman, mid-30s, blonde hair matted with sweat, eyes wide and terrified. She flinched when she saw the badge, then froze when she saw me. Her voice cracked. "Are you... Jack?" He nodded slowly. "You... Carla?" She nodded, tears brimming. He helped her out. She collapsed to her knees in the snow, shivering. "I waited," she gasped. "I couldn't leave. I didn't know where else to go. They were gonna move us again. Said there were too many eyes on this place." Jack knelt beside her. "How many others?" 8 women. 5 kids. "They left an hour ago." "Where?" I don't know. Someplace near the border. They keep changing it. He handed her a thermos from his pack. She drank like it was the first warmth she'd tasted in weeks. "We'll get them," he said. "I promise." She looked at me, then back at him. "That dog, he's the one from the news, isn't he?" Jack smiled. "That's Bear." She reached out a trembling hand. I let her touch my head. "You found us," she whispered. That night, we didn't go home. We took Carla to the sheriff's office in Twin Elk. Alvarez met us there, older now, but still sharp. He took one look at the footage, the photos, and started making calls. By dawn, a task force was forming. Jack watched it all unfold with a quiet kind of satisfaction, like a man who finally saw the scales tipping. Me. I slept curled in the corner of the office, my head on my paws, the scent of snow still clinging to my coat. But even in sleep, I listened. Because somewhere out there, women and children were still running, still hiding. And I hadn't finished the trail yet. They say a courtroom is a place for truth, but I've sat in many of them, next to Jack, behind witness stands, beneath flickering fluorescence, and I've learned something. Truth doesn't always speak the loudest. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it cries in the pauses between questions. Sometimes it just lies in the steady heartbeat of someone brave enough to stay in the room. We'd been back at the cabin for 4 days when the call came. Alvarez had built the case quicker than I expected. The footage from the trailers, the documents Jack had collected, Carla's testimony. It all came together like puzzle pieces that had been waiting years for someone to fit them. And Ellie, she said yes. She didn't even hesitate. "I'll testify," she told Jack, standing in the middle of the cabin, holding Cody close. "I'm tired of running. I want him to grow up knowing his mom didn't stay quiet." Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at her like a man watching someone rediscover their spine. "You'll be safe," he finally said. "We'll make sure of it." We drove to Helena 3 days later. Cold winds slicing between buildings, courthouse steps dusted with salt and slush. Ellie wore the nicest thing Jack could find. A navy sweater, dark jeans, boots that actually matched. She looked strong, but I could still smell the fear under her perfume. Cody stayed with a court liaison, a kind older woman named Grace, who let him bring his bear and never asked why it only had one ear. I stayed with Ellie. That had to be argued. The prosecutor, a short woman named Ellen Cho with eyes like steel marbles, petitioned the judge directly. "Your Honor, this dog is a certified emotional support animal for the witness. He was present during the recovery of Miss Moore and her child. His presence is not a distraction." "It's her anchor." The judge, a gray-haired woman with a voice like gravel and a scarf that looked hand-woven, stared at me a long time. "Is he housebroken?" "Yes, ma'am," Jack said quickly. The judge looked at Ellie, saw something there, then nodded. "Let him in." We walked in together. The defense sat across from us. Bryce Langston, clean-shaven, tie-tight, hair parted like he was posing for a bank commercial. He didn't look like a monster, but I could smell it on him, under the soap, beneath the starch of his collar. He'd washed off the dirt, but not the rot. His lawyer looked bored already, a thick man named Gregory Mace, who read from a yellow legal pad like he was ordering lunch. Ellie sat in the witness box. I laid down at her feet, close enough that our warmth could pass between us. Ellen began gently. "Miss Moore, can you tell the court how you first encountered the defendant?" Ellie's voice shook, just a little, but it held. "I met him at a shelter in Boulder. He said he was helping single mothers, helping us get IDs, housing, jobs. He wore a badge that looked real, had the language, the calm tone, the clipboard. And did he provide what he promised? No. A week later, I was in the back of a van headed somewhere I didn't recognize. He said I owed him. For the documents. For protection. Said I could pay it back by working. But there was no job. Just locked doors. There was a murmur in the gallery. The judge banged her gavel once. "And what happened after that?" Ellen asked. "I escaped. Climbed a frozen fence with my son in my arms. Walked all night. Collapsed in a park. That's when Jack and Bear found us." She looked down at me then. Her fingers brushed my ear. I leaned into her. Gregory Mace stood. "Miss Moore, do you have any written proof of this arrangement? Any recordings, messages, anything tying my client to this alleged shelter?" Ellie stayed quiet for a beat too long. "No, I don't." "And yet you claim he was the ringleader?" "I saw him. He was there." "But you have no video, no timestamp, no physical evidence placing him in that building at the same time as you?" "No." "So this is all your word?" There was a pause, then a voice broke through it. Tiny, high, clear. "Mama, not lie." Everyone turned. Cody, standing in the gallery, Bear in one hand, the other gripping the railing. His shirt was too big, his socks mismatched. But his eyes were bright and steady. She not lie. He scary man. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Bryce blinked. For the first time all day, the judge didn't gavel, just stared at Cody like the truth had finally chosen a voice. Ellie reached for her son. The bailiff gently brought him to her. She held him close, pressing her forehead to his. Ellen turned to the judge. "Your Honor, in light of the new testimony, and with the evidence from the recovered compound, we ask that the defendant be held without bail pending full trial for human trafficking, unlawful imprisonment, and impersonation of a federal officer." Detective Alvarez stepped forward then. Folder in hand, hair more gray than last time I saw him, but posture straight as ever. 4 adult women and 6 children were recovered from a similar site near the Wyoming border, he said. All have begun providing statements. Several independently identified Mr. Langston. The defense lawyer stood, pale. "Objection." "Enough," the judge said. "The court has heard sufficient cause. Bail is denied." The gavel struck. Ellie let out a sound that was part sob, part relief. Jack stood behind her, hands in his coat pockets, eyes soft. "You did it," he said. Ellie shook her head, still cradling Cody. "No." "We did." Outside in the hallway, the light came through the tall windows like something holy. Jack handed Ellie a small envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, a real one. Ink on paper, a bit of smudging near the top. It was from her mother. "My darling girl," it read. "If you're reading this, someone found you. I never stopped praying. Please forgive the silence. It wasn't abandonment. It was grief. Come home if you want. I still keep your baby picture on my nightstand." Ellie clutched it to her chest, shoulders shaking. I felt Cody's small arms around my neck. He leaned close and whispered, "Mama's safe now." And I, old, graying, bones stiff from years of running, just laid down and let him hold me as long as he needed. Because that's what we do. When words fail, when the world cracks, when courage trembles, we stay. There are things we carry with us long after the storm has passed. the way a child's voice echoes in a courtroom. The smell of old paper inked with hope. The feel of a woman's breath finally softening into safety after years of holding it in. Some of us carry scars, others carry silence. But Ellie, she carried both. It was late when we returned to the cabin. Snow had stopped falling, and the trees were still, as if they too had paused to listen. Jack unlocked the door, and Ellie stepped inside with Cody fast asleep on her shoulder, his tiny fingers wrapped around the sleeve of her coat like an anchor. She didn't say much. None of us did. Jack poured coffee, though no one drank it. He stood by the window, arms folded, watching the trees like he expected something, or someone, to step out from between the pines. Ellie sat by the fire. She held the letter in her lap, her thumb brushing over the creases again and again. Her face looked different now, not younger, not older, but fuller, like something missing had returned, even if only in ink. She read it aloud again, her voice low. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, someone found you." Her voice trembled. "I never stopped searching, never stopped praying." I laid my head on her foot. She reached down, her fingers burying themselves in my fur. "She thinks I'm still hers," Ellie said, almost to herself. "Like I'm just waiting to come home." Jack turned from the window. "You are still hers." Ellie looked up. "She didn't look for me, Jack. Not really, if she had." "She did," he interrupted. "Just not the way you wanted." Silence stretched. Then Ellie nodded, slowly. "Will you take me to her?" The drive to Cedar Falls took 2 hours and change. The sky was clear for once, winter sun weak but present. I rode in the back beside Cody, who was bundled in a fleece jacket too big for him, and holding his bear like it still whispered secrets. Ellie didn't say much, just stared out the window, fingers twisting the strap of her bag. I could smell the nervous sweat at her collar, the dry tang of old grief resurfacing. We pulled up to a small white house with lace curtains in the windows and a porch that sagged slightly on one end. There were wind chimes, silent in the still air, and a wreath on the door that looked handmade. Jack didn't get out of the truck. "You want me to come?" he asked. Ellie shook her head. "This is something I need to do myself." She opened the door. I followed. "No," she said gently, placing a hand on my chest. "You stay with Cody. I won't be long." I watched her walk up those steps like she was carrying 100 pounds on her back. The door opened before she knocked. A woman stood there, tall, silver-haired, her face worn with years but kind. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Ellie didn't speak. The woman did. "Ellie?" Ellie nodded once. "I didn't send the letter," she said. "Jack found it." "Gave it to me?" Her mother looked down at the envelope in her hand, then back up. Her voice cracked. "I wrote it every year. Dozens of versions. Only mailed one." Ellie's lip trembled. "I thought you gave up on me." "I didn't." Ellie stood there a moment longer, then stepped forward and into her mother's arms. From the truck, I saw them hold each other, neither one willing to let go. Later, we sat around her mother's kitchen table, the smell of cinnamon and old linoleum thick in the air. Cody drew on a napkin with a red crayon. Ellie's mother, Margie, poured tea and asked no questions that couldn't wait. "Your boy's gentle," she said. Ellie smiled. "He's strong." "They usually are," Margie replied, then looked at me. "And the dog?" Jack smirked. "He's retired. Doesn't act like it." I licked Cody's ear just then. The boy giggled. That night, Margie offered her spare bedroom, Ellie took it, and I curled at the foot of the bed, listening to the creaks of the old house, the distant sound of wind in the trees. Ellie didn't sleep much. I could feel her breathing shift. She got up once, walked to the window, opened it just enough to let the cold in. She stood there a long while, looking at the stars. "I wanted to come back," she whispered, "but I was ashamed." I padded over, pressed against her leg. She crouched down beside me, pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I thought I was protecting her by staying away, but maybe I was just scared she'd forgotten me. I nuzzled her cheek gently. She didn't cry. She just breathed, and that was enough. We stayed in Cedar Falls 2 more days. Margie taught Cody how to crack eggs without crushing them, showed him her garden, still sleeping under the frost, read him bedtime stories in a voice soft as flannel. I followed them everywhere, watching a bond mend itself in real time. Jack called Alvarez once a day for updates. More women were coming forward. The case against Bryce Langston was solidifying. The DA was prepping for trial. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ellie came down the stairs with her duffel packed. Margie looked up, her hands deep in bread dough. "You don't have to go," she said. Ellie shook her head. "I want to. I need to finish this." Margie nodded. "Then I'll be here when you get back." No tears, no drama, just understanding. We drove home as the clouds gathered again. Snow threatened the edges of the windshield. Jack turned up the heat. Cody slept against my side, one hand in my fur. Back at the cabin, the fire was out, the rooms cold. But we were home. Jack lit the logs. Ellie unpacked slowly. Cody ran to his toy bin like it had missed him. I sat in the middle of the room, watching it all settle, watching a life rearrange itself around what had once been broken. And though the fire burned low, I felt it again. The warmth, the kind that comes not from heat, but from being seen, from being chosen, from being home. There's a moment in every winter when the snow stops falling. Not because the storm is done, but because the sky simply forgets how to cry. That's what it felt like the morning we woke to stillness. Not silence, but stillness. The kind that settles over a town when something shifts, however quietly, and nothing quite returns to the way it was. The trial was over. Bryce Langston was in custody, denied bail, awaiting federal charges. Word had spread, first in whispers among deputies and clerks, then in headlines printed too small for the weight of what they carried. Human trafficking ring broken in mountain counties. Woman testifies against alleged abuser. Dog plays key role in rescue. That last one had my name in it. Bear. They even spelled it right. I didn't care about the articles. What mattered came slower, more subtle. A knock at the cabin door from the mayor's assistant, who brought muffins and a letter sealed with a gold stamp. A call from a local journalist asking if Jack would speak at the spring ceremony. A new blanket sent by a stranger, addressed to the dog who stayed. Jack didn't like attention. Never had. He read the invitation 3 times, then left it sitting on the counter beside an empty coffee cup and a screwdriver he never got around to putting away. Ceremonies, he muttered, are just good intentions dressed in folding chairs. But he didn't throw it out. Ellie, on the other hand, found purpose in the quiet. After everything, she could have disappeared, moved states, changed names again, but she didn't. She applied for a job at the Willow Creek Clinic, part-time nursing assistant. No fanfare, no press release, just a resume and a handwritten note that said, "I want to help people feel safe." They hired her the same day. Her first shift, I walked Cody to the door with her. He held my leash like he was the one in charge, patting my side like I needed reassurance. "Stay, Bear," he said, with all the command of a toddler pretending to be sheriff. I stayed, and when Ellie looked back at us from the glass door, her hand lifted slightly, half wave, half prayer. I knew she'd be okay. Things in town changed after that. People began stopping Jack on the street, not with questions, but with thanks. The barista at the coffee shop started giving him 2 sugars instead of 1. Said she figured he'd been through hell and earned a little sweetness. The postmaster gave Cody a sticker every time he came by with Jack to pick up a package. And folks no longer just called me that dog. They called me by name, Bear, like I belonged, like I had always been part of the town, even when they didn't notice. One afternoon, the mayor came to the cabin himself. A round man with a nose too red and a voice too loud, wearing a tie that looked like it had been ironed by a toddler. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Sheriff O'Connor, the town council would like to formally recognize your work. Yours and Ellie's. And Bear's too, of course." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "We didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's why you deserve it." They stood there in the entryway for a long minute. Then Jack nodded. "We'll be there." The day of the ceremony arrived with sunshine. Real sunshine, not the kind that glints off snow like a trick of the eye. The community lawn had been mowed, though patches of frost still clung to the shaded corners. Rows of folding chairs lined up facing a wooden platform draped in blue cloth. Banners fluttered lazily. Kids ran barefoot in the grass, their laughter bouncing like music off the courthouse bricks. I wore a red bandana. Cody insisted. Jack wore his dress blues, polished and pressed. He looked uncomfortable, but solid, like someone who knew his place, even if he didn't ask for it. Ellie wore a soft yellow sweater and jeans that fit just right. She looked like peace, not the loud kind, but the earned kind. They didn't give us medals, just a plaque with all 3 of our names. They read a speech about community and courage. The mayor called me a silent sentinel. Jack rolled his eyes at that, but I didn't mind. Then came the moment that mattered most. They handed the microphone to Cody. No one expected it. He toddled up to the podium with his bear in one arm and looked out at the sea of faces, nose crinkled against the brightness. Then he turned, crouched beside me, and whispered into the mic, "Bear saved my mommy." And that was it. No applause could follow that. No award could mean more. We left before the sun dipped behind the trees. Back at the cabin, Ellie made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Cody set the table with mismatched bowls. Jack leaned back in his chair and sighed like a man loosening his armor. I curled up by the hearth, the fire already low, the room heavy with the kind of quiet that only comes after long roads and earned endings. That night, as the wind picked up again and the pine trees swayed outside, Ellie placed the plaque on the mantel. Jack didn't stop her. She looked down at me, smiled and said, "Home looks good on us." And I thought, yes, it does. They say dogs don't measure time the way people do. Maybe that's true. But I can tell you this. There are some nights that stretch out longer than others, and some mornings that carry the warmth of more than just sunrise. What we had now at the cabin, Ellie, Jack, Cody, and me. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was something steadier, something stitched together from broken pieces that somehow held stronger than before. We didn't talk about Bryce Langston much after the trial. His name faded from the radio, from the papers. His face disappeared from the headlines, replaced by newer storms, fresher tragedies. But the echo of what he did lingered. In the way Ellie triple-checked the locks before bed. In the way Cody still sometimes flinched when the wind slammed a door. But little by little, the edges softened. Cody started calling Jack Pop without thinking about it. Jack never corrected him, just smiled and ruffled his hair like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ellie filled the cabin with things she'd never had time for before. Books on the end tables, wildflowers in mason jars, a faded map of Montana thumbtacked to the wall with pins marking places she wanted to visit. And me, I stayed close. I'd taken to napping in the same spot each day, just beneath the window seat, where the sunlight warmed the wood, and Cody often dropped bits of crackers he thought I didn't notice. My body ached more now. Stairs took effort. My ears didn't catch the high notes like they used to. But inside, something burned brighter than ever. One afternoon in early spring, Ellie pulled out a box from under the bed. It was sealed in tape, edges frayed, and it smelled like dust and old hope. She sat cross-legged on the rug, Cody beside her, watching with curiosity. "This was mine," she said. "Before." Inside the box were scraps of her old life, a nursing school ID, a folded graduation gown, photos of her and another girl laughing in a dorm room. There was a notebook, too. The first few pages were filled with lecture notes. The rest were empty. She placed it on the table, ran her fingers over the cover. "I think I want to write," she said, mostly to herself. "Not just what happened. Everything. All of it." Jack looked up from the sink where he was rinsing mugs. "You should," he said. "Stories matter." I barked softly in agreement. Ellie smiled at me. "You think so too, huh?" That night we sat around the fire. Cody was curled up in his blanket on the couch, bear tucked under one arm, mouth open in sleep. Ellie sat in the rocker, notebook in her lap, pen in hand. She didn't write right away, just stared into the flames. Jack tossed another log on the fire. Sparks leapt and danced like memories made of light. "You ever miss it?" Ellie asked. "Miss what?" "The job, the badge, the old rhythm." Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes flickering orange. "I miss the clarity," he said, "knowing what I was supposed to do every morning." He looked over at me. "But I've still got a partner." I wagged my tail once, slow and content. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Ellie asked. Jack chuckled. "Not even close." She nodded. "Me neither." She looked down at her notebook, pen finally moving. Outside, wind brushed the pine branches. Not harsh, not sharp, just present, familiar. The next day, Jack took Cody into town to buy groceries. Ellie stayed behind, reorganizing the little book nook she'd built in the corner of the living room. I followed her from room to room, my joints stiff, my pace slower than usual. "You're limping more, Bear," she said, crouching down beside me. I licked her hand. "We need to get you looked at. Maybe some pain meds." I wasn't scared of doctors, not the way people were, but I didn't need anyone to tell me what I already knew. Time was catching up. That evening, Jack made a stew, same one he always made when he didn't know what else to cook. Carrots, potatoes, beef, too much garlic. Ellie set the table, lit a candle for no reason other than she could. After dinner, I lay beside the hearth while they washed dishes. I watched the way Jack reached for Ellie's wrist as she dried the last bowl. The way her laugh was unguarded, soft, and full of something I hadn't heard in her for months. Later she sat on the floor beside me, scratching that spot behind my ear I could never quite reach. "You know you saved me," she said. I blinked at her, slow and steady. "Not just in the park," she added. "Every day since." I rested my head on her knee. "I didn't know I could feel safe again," she whispered. "But then you came and laid beside us in the snow. You didn't ask anything. You just stayed." That's all I'd ever known how to do. Stay. Even when the job ended. Even when the lights turned off. Even when no one else was watching. Later that night, after Cody had been tucked in, Ellie pulled a photo off the mantel. It was Emily, Jack's late wife, smiling beneath a cottonwood tree, wind blowing her hair across her eyes. "I never got to meet her," Ellie said. Jack came over, stood beside her. "She would have liked you." They stood there for a long time. No words, just the fire cracking. The photo resting in Ellie's hands like a borrowed memory. "She made this place," Ellie said finally. "She made me," Jack replied. They hung the photo back where it belonged. And I thought, maybe we all belong to someone who's gone before us. Maybe we carry them not in grand gestures but in quiet ones. In stew too garlicky. In books on a shelf. In the way we open the door and hold it just a second longer for someone behind us. That night, I dreamed of the first time I ever sat in a patrol car, of Jack's younger hands clipping on my vest, of the scent of adrenaline and fresh leather and certainty. And when I woke, the cabin was quiet, the fire low, and the people I loved were asleep in rooms I knew by heart. The world wasn't perfect, but the fire inside us, it never died. The sky had been kind to us for weeks, the kind of soft blue that stretched out like a deep breath, sunlight warm enough to coax green from the earth, even up here where the pines outnumbered the people. Birds came back. The snow thinned into patches, slush turning to dirt, and dirt to soft moss. Spring had settled into the bones of the cabin and into us too, quietly, without asking. But peace has a way of pulling shadows toward it. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays had become library days. Jack would take Cody into town to pick out new books. The boy had developed a fondness for anything with dragons, while Jack always came home with battered true crime paperbacks that he pretended were for Ellie. That afternoon, Ellie was humming to herself in the kitchen, slicing apples into thin wedges for a pie. She'd been trying new recipes, part therapy, part tribute to Emily, whose old index cards still lived in a worn tin above the stove. Cody sat at the table drawing, tongue poking out as he concentrated. And I lay by the screen door, sun on my back, eyes half closed, listening to the bees drift lazily past, until I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The wind. It had changed. Where it had once been warm, it now carried a sharpness, a pull. I sat up, nose high. Something wasn't right. A knock came at the door. Not rushed, not violent, just strange. Ellie stiffened, her knife paused mid-slice. I stood, slow but alert. She crossed to the door, hesitated, then opened it halfway with the chain still on. On the porch stood a woman, mid-20s, soaked through. Wind-whipped hair stuck to her cheeks, dirt on her jeans. One arm clutched around something bundled against her chest. "I'm sorry," the woman gasped, voice cracking. "I didn't know where else to go." Ellie looked down. The bundle was a baby, less than a year old, eyes wide with hunger and cold. Ellie didn't hesitate. She undid the chain, opened the door, and pulled the girl inside. Jack returned 20 minutes later, the bed of the truck rattling with library books and seed packets for a garden Ellie kept dreaming about. When he saw the extra boots by the door, muddy, too small to be his, he didn't ask questions. He just came in, looked at the girl sitting on the couch wrapped in a quilt, and set the keys on the table. "Name?" he asked gently. The girl looked up, startled. "Aubrey." Jack nodded once. "Coffee?" She shook her head. Ellie knelt in front of her, tucking the blanket tighter around the baby. "You're safe now," she said. Aubrey started to cry then, quiet, shaking, like the kind of sob that breaks through when the body realizes it's no longer in danger. The baby, May, we later learned, fell asleep in Ellie's arms. I sat nearby, close enough to watch, far enough not to spook her. Her scent was familiar, not personally, but by type. Panic, exhaustion, the strange chemical trace of roadside motels and cheap gas station soap. This was someone who had run far, fast, and recently. Later, Jack stepped out onto the porch, phone pressed to his ear. I followed. "No reports on a missing Aubrey," he said into the phone. "No Amber Alert for a baby matching May's age. I think she hasn't told anyone. I think she's been off-grid since day one." He paused, nodded slowly, then glanced at me. "She found us, Bear." That night, Aubrey told her story. She'd fled from her boyfriend, Jason, a man whose charm had curdled into control. At first it was small things, tracking her phone, dictating who she could talk to. Then came the bruises, the apologies, the threats. She tried to leave once, when May was only a few months old. He found her, and this time he said, "Next time you try that, I won't be the one bleeding." She ran the following week with only a diaper bag and her grandmother's coat, walked 4 miles in the snow, slept in a drainage tunnel, ate crackers she found in a vending machine that someone had kicked open. Then she saw the flyer in the town square. Ranger in a red scarf, with Cody on his back. Safe Snow Initiative. A phone number. Ellie's name. "This was the only address I wrote down before my battery died," Aubrey whispered. "I didn't know if it was real." Ellie reached across the table and held her hand. "It's real." We cleared out the guest room that night, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and old flannel. Cody donated his stuffed penguin to May, solemnly placing it beside her bassinet and telling her, "He's not brave, but he's soft." For days, Aubrey barely spoke. But she watched Ellie move around the kitchen, watched Jack stack firewood, watched Cody talk to his plastic dinosaurs like they were old friends. And slowly, the lines in her face began to smooth. She started helping with meals, took to brushing May's hair by the window in the morning light. One afternoon, she asked to borrow a book. Just like that. Like someone who planned to stay long enough to return it. I didn't trust easily. Not anymore. Too many years of seeing smiles that hid knives. But Aubrey, she never reached for the door handle without asking. Never looked at May like she was a burden. One morning, I followed her outside as she hung laundry on the line. Spring had truly come. The air soft and rich with thawing earth. "You're always watching," she said to me, her voice without fear now. I blinked at her. She smiled. "That's okay. You're allowed." I laid down in the grass beside the line and watched the sheets flap like sails in the breeze. When Jack received a call 2 weeks later about a man asking questions in the next county, man with dark eyes, a limp, and a chipped front tooth, Aubrey didn't panic. She just gathered her daughter, packed a bag, and stood by the door. "I won't put you in danger," she said. Jack shook his head. You're not leaving. Ellie placed a hand on her shoulder. This place, it's built for weather. Built to hold. Aubrey looked at me. I stepped forward and nudged her wrist. She sat back down. Jason never came. Or if he did, he saw something in the way the snow melted at the edges of our woods. Something that told him this wasn't a place to walk into lightly. He didn't try twice. That night, Ellie stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the stars. I sat beside her. This place was never supposed to be a refuge, she said. Just a memory. I leaned into her leg. But maybe that's what memory is. A place to rest. The wind stirred again. But this time, it carried no threat. Only a whisper. Only home. You never really know when your last patrol is. Not when you're still on your feet. You don't get a trumpet call or a medal or a firm handshake in the snow. Most of the time, it just ends quietly, like a long breath exhaled beneath a late spring sky when the birds are coming back and the kid you swore to protect is no longer afraid of shadows. I felt it in my bones before anyone else did. The ache in my joints came earlier each morning. The stretch from bed to bowl took longer. My ears still perked for danger, but the sharpness had softened. I didn't mind. The world I helped make safer no longer felt like it was running from something. Cody was growing faster than the wildflowers near the fence line. He no longer clung to my back when we walked into town. He walked beside me now, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, like I was a guidepost instead of a steed. Ellie had started writing her book, not just about what happened, but about what came after. About healing. She called it Stay, and I never told her how much that word meant to me. Jack was still Jack. Steady, quiet, watching every movement in the woods, like a man who knew the world too well to stop looking. But he smiled more now, and he laughed sometimes when he thought no one was listening. I always was. I didn't stop working, not really. There's no off switch for dogs like me. I still walked the perimeter each morning, still checked the gate latch and sniffed the breeze, still barked once at the mailman just so he knew I was paying attention. But there was a moment, late May I think, when I looked out across the field, past the creek that had finally unfrozen, and felt something loosen inside me. Not pain, not fear, just release. That night, I stayed by the fire longer than usual. Cody had fallen asleep with one hand in my fur, and Ellie covered us both with a quilt before turning off the lamp. The cabin quieted, the kind of quiet that hums like a lullaby. Wood creaking gently, wind brushing the roof, the faint whistle of Jack's old kettle forgotten on the stove. I dreamed of snow, not the kind that bites, but the kind that glows beneath a clear sky. I dreamed of the park bench, of a boy with blue fingers and a mother too still, of how I laid down beside them, not because I was trained to, but because I knew, without being told, that presence could mean survival. I woke up slow the next morning. Jack was already making coffee, Ellie humming off key in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and eggs in the air. "Morning, Bear," Jack said without turning. I wagged my tail once. Later, we all walked to the edge of the ridge behind the cabin. The grass was high and soft, dandelions blowing their little parachutes into the wind. Cody ran ahead with May, who was now walking on her own wobbly legs. Aubrey had stayed, said she didn't want to raise her daughter looking over her shoulder, said the cabin gave her spine again. We reached the big oak near the hilltop. Jack sat on the old bench he'd built with his hands, Ellie beside him, watching the kids chase butterflies. I lay at their feet, warm sun on my back, earth soft beneath my paws. I think I knew it would be my last patrol, not because something was wrong, but because nothing was. Ellie looked down at me, reached to scratch behind my ear. "You okay, old man?" she asked. I blinked once. Jack watched me for a moment. His hand found my neck, fingers pressing gently just under my collar. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. Cody ran back, threw his arms around me. "I love you, Bear." And I, tired, full, at peace, let out a long breath. The kind that comes when a job is done. That night, they carried me inside. I lay on my blanket beside the fire, the same spot I'd claimed all those years ago. Ellie curled next to me, whispering stories. Jack sat nearby, hand on my back, steady as ever. Cody kissed my nose, told me good night. I closed my eyes, and that was that. No sirens, no uniforms, just warmth, just love, just the kind of stillness that says you are exactly where you're meant to be. I didn't go with regret. I went with gratitude, because once, long ago, I heard a cry in the snow and followed it. And what I found wasn't just a boy and his mother. I found a reason to stay. And in staying, I found home. If you've made it all the way here, thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't always easy to tell, but somehow sharing it with you made the weight a little lighter. If any part of it touched you or reminded you of someone you love, leave a comment. I'd like to know I'm not the only one still carrying these memories. And if you'd like to walk with me a little longer, go on and hit that subscribe button. I've still got more stories to tell. Some are heavy, some are quiet, but all of them come from the heart of a dog who never stopped staying. I'll see you next time. Till then, be safe, be kind, and stay close, Bear.